what I would like to do is to discuss a little bit the effects of interesterified fats, so what I've called the longer term effects, so after feeding for at least 2 to 3 weeks, on fasting concentrations of lipids and lipoproteins. Here you see a kind of disclosure, committees I'm in, funding I've received, and research that I'm doing. So okay, if you look at the text structure, and it has been discussed before, interesterified fats are seen as a kind of substitute for trans fatty acids. So there was a fear for trans fatty acids, but then some papers came out also saying that interesterified fats may not be that good. If you look at the effects of fatty acids on serum lipids and lipoproteins, and I think we all know this, already 45 years ago, Thies and Hegstead developed some formulas to predict the level of total cholesterol related to fatty acid composition, and you do see some similarities. Both concluded that saturated fat increased total cholesterol compared to mono and polyunsaturated. Thies said, okay, it is C12, C16, but he didn't estimate the effects of C12, 14, and 16. Hegstead, he estimated the effects of C10, 12, 14, 16, and 18. But at the same time, he stressed, okay, it is difficult to estimate these effects because the intake of fatty acids are intercorrelated. So that means if you eat a lot of C12, maybe from coconut oil, you eat a lot of C14, and C16, C18 are intercorrelated, and that makes it difficult to disentangle the effects of fatty acids, the individual fatty acids on serum total cholesterol. And here you see an example. Hegstead, he published 2 equations. In this equation, in yellow, it included C10, 12, 14, 16, and 18, and in another one, only 14 and 16. And what you do see is that for polyunsaturates, the estimates were quite similar, but for C14, in this equation, the effect is less than in that equation, probably because part of the effect of C12 and C10 are now combined into a C14 effect, and also for C16 you do see some slight differences. So then he decided, or McGandy did, to use studies using semisynthetic fats to determine the effect of specific dietary fatty acids on serum lipids in men. So what he used was mixing fats, transesterifying them, and he had semisynthetic fats. And then again he developed equations to predict the effects. And what you do see, this is the equations in yellow are the natural fats and oils, and in green that is the McGandy paper, that is the semi-synthetic fats and oils. And you do see that for mono and poly, the estimates were quite similar. Lauric acid was quite similar, but you do see a difference for C14, but also for C18. So using semi-synthetic fats, stearic acid, in fact, increased total cholesterol compared to carbohydrates, and there was a slight decrease if you had natural fat and oils. So maybe the effects of natural and semi-synthetic fats were not the same. And that is what we already concluded 40 years ago, that a possible explanation of the discrepancy may lie in consideration of the varying configurations of the dietary triglycerides in the randomized fats. So it is not new what we are discussing here. But then it was silent because we had trans fatty acids, but then trans fatty acids were not that good, and other studies came up. So what I will now do is to review briefly some of the other studies, and I've only picked out the better ones. So, and I'm not saying that because Peter Zock is in the audience, but I think that this is one of the best studies. In that study, they used compared palm oil and they compared it to modified palm oil. So they used Betapol, and that provided 28% of energy. The Betapol was used by enzymatic interesterification, and total fat intake was 40%. Men and women, I think mainly students, and they used a crossover design for 21 days. And 21 days is enough to stabilize lipid levels. And in the end, they concluded that there was a slight unbeneficial effect of the Betapol only in men on serum total and LDL, but because the intake was so high, 28%, they said, okay, the practical, it has no practical meaning. Here you see the effects. This is for all, this is for women, this is for men, and you do see only for LDL cholesterol, if palmitic acid is at SN2, a slight increase in LDL. For HDL, you didn't see any effects at all. And this is what Peter already said just a few minutes ago. If you look in triacylglycerol, in fasting triacylglycerol, or in cholesterol esters, you do see the same. Then you see that the SN2 position is preserved. This is palmitic acid at SN2, and this is oleic acid at SN2, and this is the difference between the Betapol and the palm oil diet. So if you consume Betapol, palmitic acid at SN2 increases mainly at the expense of oleic acid. So you do see that in fasting triacylglycerol, and that is, I guess, mainly VLDL, the SN2 position is preserved. In another paper by Paul Nestel, they used two fat blends rich in palmitic acid, one of which was randomized, and they provided 20% energy. Total fat intake was 32%. I think they used chemical interesterification. It was not mentioned in the paper, and this study was done in hypercholesterolemic men, and again 21 days on the diets, and they also didn't see any effects at all on the fasting serum lipoprotein profile. So maybe you can now conclude, okay, SN1, SN2 for palmitic acid is not that important, but there are some studies suggesting that palm olein and olive oil have the same effects on serum lipids and lipoproteins. And the question is, A, is it true, and B, what does explain it? These are two of the studies that showed these effects. One was published in 1905, the other in 1992. Palm olein versus olive oil, 17% of energy. Normal cholesterolemic men, this is a study from Australia, at 30 days on the diet. And I think this is a study from Malaysia, and they also showed similar effects of palm olein and olive oil on the serum lipids and lipoprotein profile. Here you see a little bit into more detail one of the two studies. This is the intake of saturated fat, the intake of mono, the intake of polyunsaturated fat. That was essentially the same. The difference is in C16, palm olein. It was provided more palmitic acid than olive oil did, and of course olive oil provided more oleic acid than palm olein did. But despite this difference, you expect that olive oil would decrease LDL cholesterol, but that was not observed. They did see similar LDL and HDL and triglyceride levels. So that is a bit of different than expected. Now, how did they explain the results? Mainly by what some people call the SN2 hypothesis, that if palmitic acid is at the SN2 position, it does not increase LDL compared to oleic acid. If it is in SN2, then it may increase LDL compared to olive oil, oleic acid. So in plant oils, the SN2 of implant, the palmitic acid is mainly at the SN1 position, and in animal fats or in lard specifically, it is that the palmitic acid is at the SN2 position. So if that is true, what would it mean? That, as I already said, if palm olein and olive oil should have similar effects on LDL cholesterol, because palmitic acid is at SN1 here, and if it is at SN1, it has the same effects on lipids and lipoproteins as oleic acid. If it is at SN2, then it would mean then we are looking at lard, that lard increases cholesterol compared to palm olein. So there have been two recent studies that examined that hypothesis, and one was from Malaysia by Foon, published in the December issue of the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. On the left, you see the fatty acid profile of the diets, and here you see the LDL cholesterol level. This is C12, 14, C16, oleic acid, linoleic acid, and what you see is that on the coconut oil diet, the increase of the intake of C12, 14, of course, is quite high compared to the other two diets. Palm olein provides a lot of C16 and a little bit, and also C18-1, and olive oil less 16 and more 18-1. And what they did see is that LDL cholesterol between the palm olein and the olive oil diet did not differ significantly. So they said, okay, see, here we have to prove palm olein and olive oil have similar effects. But what they didn't tell is that palm olein, or didn't discuss into detail, and coconut oil also had similar effects. And this is actually what you expect. C12, 14 increases LDL more than C16, and C16 increases it more than palmitic acid. So in fact, this is more what you expect, and for me it is no proof that palm olein, in which C16 is at SN1, is equally hypercholesterolemic than olive oil. In the second study by Tina Tolstrup from Denmark, they compared lard with palm olein, and what I said, lard C16 at SN2, so then you expect an increase in LDL on the lard diet compared to the palm olein diet. This is the fatty acid composition, so you see linoleic acid intake quite well matched. Palmitic acid intake a little bit lower on the lard diet, but not really a huge difference. Olive oil, of course, mainly provides oleic acid. And what you do see is similar LDL cholesterol levels between palm olein and the lard diet. So again, no proof that the position of palmitic acid at SN1 or SN2 is important. Olive oil, in fact, give the lowest LDL cholesterol levels. So again, also in natural fats, palmitic acid at SN1 and SN2, in my view, is not that important. If we now turn to stearic acid, there have been a few studies on stearic acid. One was done by Francesco Grande, also more than 40 years ago, and he used cocoa butter and he compared it to imitation cocoa butter, and that in fact was a randomized fat, and that provided 31% of energy. Total fat intake was quite high, normal cholesterolemic man, and 18 days on the diet. Here you see the two diets, the cocoa butter and the imitation cocoa butter. This is total cholesterol, and at that time they didn't analyze LDL and HDL, but you do see similar total cholesterol levels by the cocoa butter and the imitation cocoa butter. So no indication that randomization of stearic acid is important for fasting lipids. Another study by Sarah Berry and Tom Sanders 5 years ago, they compared naked shea butter versus randomized, provided about 10 to 15% of energy in the diet, 16 men, 21 days on the diets, and here you see the effects on lipids, randomized, unrandomized, all similar. So again, no proof that that randomization of stearic acid is important. For the last few slides is on interesterified fat blends, and then the results are a little bit more controversial. This paper was already discussed by David a few minutes ago, by Gert Meijer and Jan Weststraat from Unilever, looking at the various two fat blends providing 4 or 8% of energy, 16 healthy non-cholesterolemic men and women, again 21 days on the diets, and no effects on the serum lipoprotein profile. However, there's also another study on interesterified fat blends by Sundram, published 5 years ago, and I would like to discuss that in a little bit more detail. He used palm olein. He compared it with partially hydrogenated soybean oil and an interesterified fat rich in stearic acid. And these experimental fats provided about 70% of total fat intake, and total fat intake was 31%, so the experimental fats provided about 20%, 22% of energy intake. Normal cholesterolemic men and women, and 28 days on the diet, and they used a crossover design. And they concluded that especially the diet rich in the interesterified diet rich in stearic acid had adverse effects on LDL cholesterol. These were the best fats, as I already said: palm olein, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, interesterified fat rich in stearic acid, made by fully hydrogenated soybean oil. It was blended with soybean oil and palm olein, and then interesterified. This is the fatty acid composition of the dyes, and then you do already see that it is difficult to interpret the results because it varied widely between the diets. This is the palm olein diet. As expected, a lot of palmitic acid and oleic acid, monounsaturated fatty acids, a little bit less of stearic acid and linoleic acid. From the partially hydrogenated soybean oil, you do see a lot of monounsaturates, but also a bit of trans fatty acids, and the interesterified fat, in fact, provided. The intake of saturated fatty acids was the highest on that particular diet, and that was mainly due to the intake of stearic acid. And here you see what they found, and I will explain this slide a bit more into detail, because this one is the effects of the partially hydrogenated soybean oil versus palm olein, so that was taken as a point of reference. And this is the effect of the interesterified fat, again versus palm olein. And this is what they observed. So the partially hydrogenated soybean oil increased LDL cholesterol. You can also calculate using the equations. Okay, what do you expect? What for decrease in LDL cholesterol do you expect? And that is this. So here you see a difference of 0.3 between observed and calculated predicted values. And this difference of 0.3 is quite large. This is my own formula, so I do believe in it, to be honest, but this is, I've never seen such a huge discrepancy. The same for the other one. They did see an increase of 0.10, and what was predicted was a decrease of 0.3. So again, a difference of about 0.4. So you do see there's a large difference between predicted and observed values. For HDL, it's a little bit more in line of observed and predicted values. Observed minus 0.1, observed minus 0.05, and I think that is acceptable. And for HDL, on the interesterified fat, observed 0.12 and predicted about 0.8. So I think that is acceptable. So the largest difference is in LDL cholesterol. So what I would like to do is to conclude that at present intakes, the effects of interesterified fats, rich in saturated fatty acids, on the fasting serum lipoprotein profile are small or marginal. For C16, also for fat blends, and also for stearic acid. There's one paper that I can't explain, but maybe someone in the audience can. That's the paper of Sundram et al. And I see no apparent reason for this discrepancy. What I didn't discuss is the effects of the polyunsaturates of SN1 versus SN2, because no studies have been done on fasting lipids and lipoproteins using polyunsaturated fatty acids. So in the end, I would like to thank you for your attention, and any questions are welcome.